Right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eli Storch. I'm the chair of the Design Advocacy Group. Appreciate you joining us for our June DAG monthly meeting, focusing on a resilient vision for FDR Park. Please keep yourselves muted throughout. If you have cause to speak, if you have an announcement or a question later in the session, you can unmute, of course, then, but give us a hand with the audio quality and keep everybody muted. If you have any technical difficulties, you can message myself or Lachelle Weathers, our wonderful DAG fellow, and we'll do our best to assist you. One tradition we used to do when we were all in person was we'd go around the circle and everyone would introduce themselves and say hi and where they were coming from. And so I'd like to keep that going. So if you put in the chat who you are, what brings you here today, we can see everybody and have everyone contribute why they're here and where they're coming from. We would gladly appreciate your input as we all sort of try to treat this like a round table where we're sharing together. And if you have any announcements, any events, any upcoming shows, lectures, other things that you want to share with the community, please also put those in the chat, and I will I'll sound you out to say hi and tell us about it. So typically our meetings have been off the record. You saw that I am recording. We do try, now that we have the capability to record and share with a broader audience, we are doing that. And we can go all the way back to September of 2020 when we were started doing this. So if you go on our website, and I'll put some links in the chat of our website and our YouTube stream, that you can go back and watch a whole bunch of DAG content and take a look at that. And if you enjoy it and you like what we're doing, feel free to hit another link on our website and throw a few dollars our way. And it is the support of our friends and folks like you that keep us moving, and we do appreciate that. We have a couple advocacy announcements this morning, so I wanted to first go over to George Claflin. George, do you want to say hi and give us an update?
Thank you, Eli. Yes, I have 4 short items. I'll start with the informational items and then 2 that are potential policy items. I hope most of our members have already seen that the city is planning to apply for funds to put a cap over 676 in the Chinatown area. This is highly desirable, and I'm hoping they find the contractors who work as quickly as the contractors who did the rebuild of the caps west of Broad Street, which were accomplished more than a year ahead of schedule a few years ago. But this is a significant urban design re-knitting of the city, and I understand from Nando Macaulay that he will be doing a studio on that subject at Penn in 2023. The second informational item, I guess, is that at the last CDR meeting, Civic Design Review, projects totaling 748 units were brought up, some of them on their first appearance and some of them on their second appearance. And one in particular that's related to the Beach Street housing, it's now got this group of houses has a Richmond Street address. It's 300 units, and it includes 5,000 square feet of retail. And I've certainly raised the issue, and I wonder if DAG should consider taking a position on the large amount of housing that's being built without comparable improvements to the infrastructure, whether it's retail, recreation, or education facilities. This is a significant issue in terms of the incredible amount of residential construction that's going on. The other item, which relates to the 676 issue, is again something that I hope most of our members are aware of, is that recently Inga Saffron wrote about the issues of I-95 and the elevated portions of I-95 separating the rest of the city from the river. And this is a very unfortunate condition. It's been, of course, in the works for years as PennDOT plans years ahead for its capital improvements, and the seemingly endless reconstruction of I-95 will be continuing for quite some time as additional projects occur. The one area of maybe a little bit of optimism is that once the bridges are built, things can still be constructed under them. And again, maybe we can advocate for some improvements below these now even wider bridge structures. But there appears to be no realistic hope of removing them, at least in the lifetime of anyone who's alive now. And the last item is probably the most controversial, is the status of Washington Avenue, especially west of Broad. DAG has stayed out of that battle thus far. And as we understand it, and there may be people online here that have much greater understanding, the plan at the moment is to do roughly 3 lanes and certain improvements east of Broad, and then roughly 5 lanes with less improvements west of Broad. And I think there is an issue of, regardless of the many other policy questions that have been raised by neighborhood groups and city council persons, safety seems to be paramount here. And I wonder whether a position should be taken regarding the west of Broad improvements particularly. So I'll stop there. I don't know if there's any, I don't really think we have time for many comments, but if people can communicate via the chat or other means, we can probably pursue that.
Thank you, George. Yeah, there's a lot to come and a lot we need to keep our eyes on. Another sort of ongoing issue is the Philadelphia streeteries regulations. Kat, do you want to give us an update on sort of where that stands and where DAG is on those issues?
Sure. So we've had a streeteries working group working together over the last number of months, working through existing conditions in Philadelphia and trying to come up with some recommendations. And that would be in support of it pending legislation that we still don't have the final details on. There are rumors in the rumor mill that it will be forthcoming, but still don't have any firm action out of city council. So we'll see what happens. In the meantime, LRK has generously given us some of their interns' time, and the 2 of them, Richard and David, are working on building some interactive visual guidelines around what makes a good streetery. It looks like the deliverable is going to be a website, which also will hopefully be a clearinghouse that will be an ease of access point for restaurateurs in terms of permitting and design guidance and all these things. So they are working through what that will look like right now, and then moving on into some actual design solutions over the next couple months. And we will keep you posted with what they come up with.
Yeah, I just dropped the dagfellow@gmail.com into the chat. Lachelle Weathers, our wonderful DAG fellow, sort of air traffic control there. So if you want to get involved, if you want to hear more about what we're working on or be on the team or generally have your say, please send it to Lachelle at dagfellow@gmail.com and we will we'll connect. David, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that if anyone on this call or anyone at all is interested in posting their own opinion about any of the issues that we've talked about here, or any issues at all, or simply interested in writing an informative piece about something that's going on in the built environment in Philadelphia, please think about submitting your piece as an essay to DAG Forum, which is basically our op-ed column. You'll see the details on the website, but there are lots of interesting things going on, and I'm sure that there are lots of strongly held opinions represented here on the call today. Share them, and DAG Forum can be a place to do that. Thanks.
Yes, I appreciate you mentioning that, David. So before we get into our program, Marcia, do you want to give us a tease on what's coming up in July?
Yes, thanks, Eli, and hi, everyone. We're happy to announce that Greg Reeves, founder and co-owner of Mosaic Development Partners, will be speaking on July 14th. Greg will be highlighting inclusive development as a strategy to improve the economy, which includes hiring BIPOC businesses with the overall goal of reducing poverty and building wealth in neighborhoods such as in Fairhill, Strawberry Mansion, Brewery Town, Norris Square, Germantown, and West Philly. To date, those investments have totaled more than $120 million. Very impressive. So please join us on July 14th, even if you're sitting on the beach. So back to you, Eli.
Thank you, Marcia. And that link is live. So if you go to our website, you can get your free ticket to that, which will get you the link to the Zoom. So with that, let's move into our program. Again, throughout the Q&A, please throw questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to as many of them as we can. I wanted to pass it along to Allison Harvey, a wonderful DAG steering committee member and landscape architect, who's going to introduce our presenters and moderate the Q&A. Allison, take it away.
All right, good morning, everybody. So we're here to talk about the Franklin Delano Roosevelt FDR Park Master Plan. I'm calling from South Philadelphia, and as a resident of South Philadelphia, I can really speak to how this is such a jewel of our community. So with 348 acres of open space and parkland, FDR Park provides seemingly endless program opportunity that can significantly impact the health of our region, touching not only human wellness, but also ecological and environmental. And as many know, a large portion of the park resides below the level of the river and is experiencing growing pressures from sea level rise, which continues to exacerbate the flooding issues in the lands along our waterfronts. This park is also a registered historic landscape in Philadelphia, I believe our only one, having a significant portion of it designed by the Olmsted brothers. And so today we're going to be speaking about the future of this park, and I'd like to introduce Catherine Lovell and Charles Neer, who will be discussing the master plan for this incredible asset. The new master plan envisions a balance between nature, water, and active recreation by matching user needs with the environmental opportunities it has to offer. And in collaboration between ecology and culture, it looks to maximize public welfare and environmental health. And really this ambitious plan recommends or makes recommendations of how FDR Park can become the first self-funding park in the city through a creative matrix of revenue, generated income, and through public and private partnerships. And this plan leverages the power of parks to provide access to recreational opportunities, spur local economy, and protect Philadelphia from climate change. And I'm going to quickly go through the bios for Catherine and Charles so that you all can get to know them a little more. So Catherine Lovell was appointed Commissioner of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation by Mayor Kenny in 2016. As Commissioner, Catherine oversees 700 full-time employees, 2,700 part-time employees, 10,200 acres of land, 250 playgrounds, and thousands of programs and events throughout Philadelphia. Catherine, you're a very busy person. In 2017, Catherine commissioned the first strategic plan for Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. The plan, Our Path to 2020, set in motion a trajectory towards an equitable and exceptional parks and recreation system that connects people to each other, to enriching experiences, and to the natural world. The plan emphasizes citizen-centric service and high-quality, relevant, and accessible programs. And Charles Neer is a senior associate at WRT and leads WRT's Parks and Open Space practice. Charles' view of landscape as a productive agent in shaping of cities, countryside, and culture is informed by over 20 years of experience with urban landscapes, park master planning, and design. Charles has served as the project manager for national park projects in Philadelphia, Louisville, Austin, and Roanoke, including FDR Park Master Plan and the parklands of Floyd's Fork. He has worked on various waterfronts, campus master plans and urban designs throughout the country, including the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative, Washington, D.C., and the Principal Riverwalk in Des Moines, Iowa, and Dutch Kills Green in Queens, New York. Charles has taught studios at the University of Pennsylvania, Temple University, and is board president of Fairmont Community Development Corporation, and is board member of the McHarg Center for Urbanism and Ecology at the University of Pennsylvania. Charles is a member of the Urban Land Institute, City Parks Alliance, World Urban Parks, and American Society of Landscape Architects. So a warm welcome to you both. Thank you for taking time out of your days to speak to this group. And I'm going to turn it over to Charles. Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Catherine and let her give a little bit of an introduction to the master plan and some of the context. And then I will take it from there and run through some of the presentation with Catherine chipping in. Catherine?
Thanks, Charlie. I'm really, really grateful to you guys for having us today to do this. And it's nice to see so many familiar faces and names. So I'm just really grateful for everybody for making time for this morning. I'm going to give a sort of a broad overview of how we got to this place at this point in time and thinking about FDR. But I also want to start out by giving just a huge shout out to Charlie and his team at WRT. We did an RFP for this project and we selected WRT, and I'm sure at that point Charlie and Keiko, his great partner on this project, were excited, but little did they know that this would be a complete and total loss leader for them and drain on every available piece of energy and resources for WRT. And I joke with them all the time, every time I have a chance to do this dog and pony show with Charlie, that the amount of work that they have put into this plan, and I know we have so many landscape architects and architects on this call today, and that's why I really want to point this out. The amount of time and resources that WRT has put into this plan has been nothing short of extraordinary. And this has been a true portfolio project for them and a labor of love for this firm. And I'm just really grateful to the incredible just excellence that they have brought to this project every single step along this way, from the community engagement, which was some of the most robust engagement I've ever been involved with in the decade or so I've been involved in public space work, to the excellence of the design itself, and the creativity and innovation that has been necessary to make all of this work. Just kudos to Charlie and Keiko and their great team at WRT. Let me also give a shout out to Barb Capozzi, who is joining us here today. And Barb is the president and the founder, I think, of the Friends of FDR Park. And I love to have Barb on these conversations because, this is how it all started for me. Before I worked at Parks and Rec, I worked for an organization called the Fairmont Park Conservancy that is helping to lead this planning process for FDR. And when I first started at the Conservancy, one of my very first meetings was with the Friends of FDR Park, because we wanted to do a small project at FDR with some funds that we raised. And I had a meeting with Barb, and it was unpleasant to say the least. It was a really tough meeting because Barb and her group of friends who had been working for FDR for years, just couldn't get traction with the city and couldn't get even responses on some basic needs at the park. And I think Barb, who's a lifelong South Philadelphian and a tremendous leader in the South Philadelphia community, she saw the potential of this park and recognized its incredible connection to this community, but broader than that, its potential to really just lift up this entire section of the city, and saw that it was being wasted and ignored. And that first meeting with her and the subsequent meetings that followed with her and that group really helped me understand that FDR Park is really one of our greatest assets in our entire inventory at Philly Parks and Recreation. It has everything. I mean, as Allison said, it has this extraordinary history as one of our only Olmsted Park, our only Olmsted Park, and one of the only in this area. It is, it is in a perfect location. I mean, it is, from transportation access, it's in a phenomenal location. It has so many different aspects to it, from the active recreation to the lakes themselves, to the cultural assets like the Swedish Museum, and the history of this being a sesquicentennial site, and so much of it being developed as part of the sesquicentennial. There's so much there's so much there. But to be honest, the city had, really, I'm not going to say ignored the park, but, as you all know, I'm sure, the very sad history of Parks and Recreation's budget woes, and the former Fairmount Park Commission, because this was a Fairmount Park Commission park, since its inception. It just was, stripped of resources and under-resourced for so long. And so much has gone wrong with this park, in terms of, the flooding and, elements falling into disrepair. And so really it was when I first started in my position as commissioner that at Parks and Rec that I started to think about, what we could be doing at FDR. And to be honest, over the years, so many people had come up with their own ideas for FDR. Like over the years, it was, well, it could be the site for this, it could be the site for this, or let's plop a velodrome. I don't know if I remember the velodrome conversation of the mid 2010s, but the idea was that we're just going to put a giant velodrome in the middle of FDR. And when I first started here, the airport came to us with this idea that they wanted to build a wetlands as part of their wetland mitigation work for their continued expansion. And when the airport came and had this idea to invest, $30 million to build a wetlands at FDR, I said, you know what, we need to, I like that idea. This would be a really interesting opportunity for the park, but it's time we do a master plan for FDR. And it's time that we really, don't let other people inform the vision for FDR, but we really need to talk to the stakeholders of this park. And that's when we did this RFP and engaged WRT to support that process. And as I said, it was, and hopefully Charlie will talk a little bit about this, but it was an incredibly robust engagement process that was at some points I said, can we just, we got to stop at some point, because it was so intensive going into communities that had never been engaged around FDR, or felt that they, loved the park, but didn't feel like, they had a place there. We engaged, literally thousands of people over a year and a half of the sort of stakeholder gathering and discovery phase and community engagement phase. And then WRT came up with this, really extraordinary plan for the park that incorporated everything that people wanted. And I think that is the best part about this plan, is that, it is a big park. It's 350 acres. And it's big enough for us to offer something for everyone, and to be able to accommodate so many of the really critical uses for this space, while also, keeping it as a wonderful place for wildlife and habitat. So, and then, we had, at the same time that we decided to raise funds and do this master plan for the park, we had a mayor who, this was his park. So I would be lying if I didn't say that wasn't in my head too, to say, if there was going to be a legacy project for Jim Kenney, I was pretty sure it was FDR, and that it would be a pretty easy sell for me to once we had a plan in place, to really get the administration to support it at a high level. And, I'm thrilled to say that we've raised almost $90 million for the plan to date, and that that's just an extraordinary investment in one park. It's never happened before in the history of our city, to my knowledge, at that level. And my hope was that we could get to 100 million before the end of the Kenney administration, and I think we'll get there. So the plan, as Charlie will present it today, is well on its way to being implemented, and we're just tremendously excited about about what this means, not just for South Philadelphia, but what it means for the broader, region in terms of this level of investment in public space. And before I kick it over to Charlie, I'll say that, I think that, what this project really demonstrates is, for a very long time, and certainly in the time that I've been in the public space world, there's still, we still struggle with shifting this narrative about parks and public space, that it is a necessity as opposed to just a nicety, right? And when the pandemic hit, and I thought and everything closed, right? I mean, it was within a few weeks, right? We had stores closed and schools closed and businesses closed and churches closed. What stayed open was parks, right? And what we realized in, over the past 2 years, I think more than ever, is that, parks and recreation and public space is essential. It's essential. It's an essential service that we provide. And I think what FDR does is it helps to drive that home, but also helps to demonstrate that parks can be extraordinary community and economic development drivers for our city. We're seeing this at other cities across the country, where parks have been huge drivers for, of course, economic development and community development, but also tourism. And I think that's, the incredible potential that we're also building here with the plan for FDR. So Charlie, take it away. And then I've told Charlie I reserve the right to weigh in on the presentation as he goes.
Of course. Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for inviting us here today. Before I start digging through the actual presentation and start going through all the slides, I like to start the presentation with sort of a top 10 of like the really cool, unique things about FDR Park that make it so unique within the city. The first is that this is arguably the most diverse park in Philadelphia. If you come here on the weekends, you see so many different nationalities and so many different people from all walks of life enjoying the park, as Catherine was just describing. Second, it's the city's only estuary park. Third, it's called an IBA, which is not really a great name, but it stands for an important bird area. There are over 195 different species of birds that call FDR Park home, which is really quite remarkable. Number four, it's also a resiliency hub as defined by the National Fish and Wildlife Society. Catherine and Allison have already mentioned that this is the only Olmsted Brothers Park in Philadelphia. They've also mentioned that it's the only, the eastern part of the park is on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, as well as the historic Bel Air Manor that overlooks the old golf course. It's also the only park in Philadelphia that's connected to an active subway line. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. It's the most permitted park for picnics in the city. There may be parts of Fairmount Park that may actually have more visitors picnicking on the weekend, but at least in terms of permits, FDR is the #1 permitted park in the city. And as many people know, it's also home to the largest and the coolest do-it-yourself skateboard park, arguably in the world. It is also home to one of the largest Southeast Asian marketplaces in the East Coast. And if you haven't been there, please go check it out on the weekends. The food is amazing. And sort of an 11th sort of bonus point here is that FDR Park is the only park in the city that has its own executive director. So with that, I want to launch a little bit into some of the history of the park. So before the park was built, the land on FDR what used to be basically low-lying tide marsh and farms. Fill from the Broad Street subway was actually used to fill in most of the low-lying areas, helping to create the ground that was to become the park. The Olmsted firm was hired in 1914 to design what was really called at that point League Island Park. The design featured curvilinear circulation routes, open spaces for active and passive recreation, natural and decorative plantings, and a system of lakes and lagoons and creeks that are still there today and form the core of the park's identity. You can still see Pattison Lagoon, Edgewood Lake over here, Meadow Lake over here, and Hollander Creek over here. Also very interesting to note in the original Olmsted plan is that FDR Park, or League Island Park at that point, extended east of Broad Street to the area where the current Wells Fargo Center is right now. Catherine mentioned the sesquicentennial in 1926, which is the 150th anniversary of our country, where many of the current buildings that are in the park, such as the Swedish Museum, the guardhouse buildings, and even the bathhouse buildings were built. Now, The one constant with FDR Park is really a history of change. Shortly after the sesquicentennial, the east portion of the park was kept for stadiums and became the sports complex that we know today, basically effectively losing that whole east side of the park. In the 1930s, 180 acres of land were added to the western part of the park, west of 20th Street. That became the FDR Golf Course, which reflected the changing recreation needs of the time. In the 1960s, I-95 sliced through the southern end of the park, forever changing the identity of the park. In the 1970s, the site received fill from in the southwest corner of the park from demolition of wastewater treatment plants and other urban fill. Since the 1980s, the park has really not seen any significant investment. So since that time, as Catherine was saying, there's been significant change in population demographics in South Philadelphia, as well as continued change in recreational programming. When we started the master plan, the infrastructure in the park was over 100 years old and in dire need of overhaul. Some of those water lines can only be held together with prayer and bubble gum for so long. The park that is such an important natural and cultural and historic asset for the city was being lost and required a vision worthy of its history and strategic location. So this is what the park looked like in 2017 when we started the master plan. And it basically reflected two halves of one park. You have the FDR Golf Course to the west, and you have the more historic traditional part of FDR Park that most people know and love on the east side of the park. Catherine already touched base on some of these immediate issues that were facing everyone in 2017-18 when the master plan started. First, if you remember, the potholes that were occurring due to flooding along the park road, making the park road almost unusable. The mayor joked that it looked like the dark side of the moon, but most importantly, it was putting people, cars, and bicyclists at risk. Many felt that it was convenient just to dump their trash in the park when no one was looking, or even if people were looking for that matter. Maintenance was severely limited to the most basic park needs, and the visitor experience was lacking, and visitor amenities were almost non-existent, with only one public restroom and no place to get a drink and almost no place to sit in the park. The park was also facing several long-term issues. Catherine already mentioned that funding is a crucial issue affecting like the entire park system throughout the city. Flooding and climate change are exacerbating the usable space within the park. And it's not just water quantity, but it's also the water quality and the water bodies that needed to be improved to help maintain a healthy habitat. Most importantly, the park did not reflect the highest and best use programming when every square inch of public open space in the city is so vital. Now, the park's hydrology is really what drives everything in the park. The dark dashed line that you see over here and around the edge over here reflects the historic Delaware River shoreline and remnants of the Hollander Creek, which drain parts of South Philadelphia. It is this Hollander Creek that the Olmsted brothers turned into the system of water bodies we know today in the park. You can also see in shades of purple the 100 and the 500-year floodplain, of which almost 90% of the park sits within. The area in white in the southwest corner over here is one of the highest parts of the park and reflects that urban fill that was dumped in the 1970s. Now, the fill at the time was placed at one of the original lowest parts of the park that helped to manage most of the park's stormwater. The park is basically shaped like a bathtub, as Allison was mentioning in the beginning, with both Hollander Creek and Shedbrook Creek along that drains part of the golf course over here on the west. Together, they merge together in a twin culvert that runs underneath the railroad tracks in I-95 to the Navy Basin, where there's a tide gate that keeps the river water from coming back into the park. The shaded area around the lakes and around most of the western part of the park reflect where groundwater levels are close or near to the surface. And the magenta arrows that you see coming into Pattison Lagoon from the north and the northeast and from I-95 indicate where site stormwater is currently entering the park completely unfiltered. So why does the park flood all the time? Well, when it rains, you have the rainwater that's falling into the park. You also have the offsite runoff that's coming in. All of this is going into the lakes and eventually trying to get out through these twin culverts that you can see over here. But because of the low elevations, water can only drain out of the culvert when the water level in the Navy Basin is low enough to let that water out. Currently, that culvert is partially clogged with years of debris, and apparently even a refrigerator is in there. I mentioned earlier that the site sits at the terminus of the Broad Street subway line, And as Catherine mentioned, it's also ringed by the highway network and railway networks. Yet in true Philly style, over 75% of the park users are driving to the park. Currently, the park serves a multitude of people in the city and in the Mid-Atlantic and even in the world. It is the backyard for South Philadelphia and the front yard for the Navy Yard. Some of the dense row home neighborhoods of South Philadelphia are famous for being Italian and Irish, but they should also be equally known for the Southeast Asian and Central American immigrants that give the neighborhoods their vitality today. Since FDR Park was first developed over a century ago, South Philadelphia has been the gateway neighborhood for immigrants arriving in Philadelphia. FDR Park provides a vital service connecting new residents with each other and with opportunities, like an informal food market, recreation, and as a green refuge from the urban heat island effect. One of the region's best Southeast Asian markets draw visitors from New York to Maryland over the weekends for the past 40 years. Ensuring that the park holds space for immigrants and Black communities, along with generations of Philadelphians who know this park from tailgating, needs to be a priority, or needed to be a priority, of the master planning process. Speaking of Eagles fans and wildlife, FDR Park is home to a wide diversity of wildlife that is critical to its existing ecology. You can see from this figure the diversity of species that you might encounter on a walk through the park. Creating quality habitat is absolutely paramount to the success of the park. So how did we get here? Well, when we started the master plan, we had three goals that we started with. The first was to reclaim the original vision of the park. And this meant not turning the clock back, but honoring the original significance of the original design intent. The second is restoring the ecological function of the park. And the third was renewing the impact that the park has within the larger city. We knew that this was going to be a process of finding the balance between nature, water, and activities into one unified system, just like the original Olmsted plan strove to do almost 100 years ago, or a little more than 100 years ago. We began by setting out with an extensive community engagement process during our 2-year planning process. We knew that the master plan would need to have a strong constituency of support across all city agencies, with a diverse set of stakeholders, often with conflicting demands. The community engagement process included nearly 3,000 individuals in up to 7 different languages. We did online surveys, in-park engagement, 2 public open houses, even a planned celebration when we were done, at least 30 different stakeholder meetings. We even developed a mobile planning booth in the park. And the Fairmount Park Conservancy even hired 5 park ambassadors who were members of the adjacent neighborhoods or of key user groups in the park that helped get the word out about the master plan and made sure that everyone was involved in the process, and in some cases even helped out with translation services. It's a testament to the outcome leadership that all of these ambassadors are still deeply involved with the park in one way or another today.
Charlie, I'm going to interject and say that Martha in the middle there is a full-time employee with Parks and Rec now. She just got a full-time job with us, so really exciting.
Yay, that is great news. We also went into the communities to lead a series of design workshops that we call meetings in a box. Now, these workshops were held in multiple languages and created teams from different stakeholder groups. The critical point here was not that everyone create the best plan, but basically we wanted them to learn how groups set priorities and make compromises. In other words, how do people feel, or how do people basically find the balance together? Now, what came out of this planning process, this 2-year planning process, is a set of priorities centered around nature, water, and activities. People said that they wanted to preserve and enhance opportunities to connect with nature and water. They also wanted to continue and expand opportunities for youth athletics and environmental education. Our conversations with the community also focused on scenario planning. We created max versions of activity, nature, and water, knowing that the final plan would not be one of these, but a mixture of all 3. And instead of having people vote for what would be their favorite scheme, what we did is we set up different, we allowed these scenarios we developed priorities within each of these scenarios. And we asked the community really what was their top priority regarding each of these scenarios, basically what fit the most for each of these scenarios. We also asked them to determine the balance between the 3 themes. So we knew when we were putting the actual program together, how to emphasize the balance. The other thing that we did to help us find the balance was we used an inclusive range of considerations, both environmental, economic, and social. to maximize the benefits for the park and to measure the park's health and resiliency. Every move that the design team had to make needed to solve multiple challenges, and this matrix helped us to identify the maximum benefits of each of these moves. Now, this is the vision of what this planning process looked like, the eventual park master plan that we presented to the public in May of 2019. The master plan vision reflects a network of watercourses enclosed by swaths of reforestation, encircled by a network of trail systems and tree-lined parkways, framed by fields of active recreation. Playgrounds, restrooms, picnic pavilions, overlooks, and concessions are systemically distributed throughout the park to enhance the visitor experience. Enhanced gateways, expanded event lawns, and increased programming activate the fields at the park's edge, while restored lakes, creeks, wetlands, and riparian reforestation provide an immersive nature experience with enhanced habitat connectivity at the park's ecological core. Now, to highlight, there are over 3 times as many trails in the final plan as there were before we started, including a 5K multi-use trail that weaves through the entire park that you can sort of see wrapping around through the park and through the perimeter of the park. So this will be really helpful in terms of we can actually have 5K events here, and not every single event needs to happen on the Ben Franklin Parkway. Now, when we developed the master plan, we came up with this party diagram of the ecological core in the middle, surrounded by this urban edge. So the ecological core contains some of the most iconic elements of the park, which are also the areas of the park most susceptible to flood risk. The master plan recognizes this risk by increasing the park's capacity to manage water while simultaneously providing opportunities for park users to connect with nature. Expanding the natural systems at the heart of the park improves the ecosystem services that the park offers to all park users. The urban edge encircles the ecological core and frames the perimeter of the park, providing an attractive and welcoming interface with the adjacent communities. The urban edge contains a network of green stormwater infrastructure designed to manage runoff from surrounding urban areas. Natural filtration systems ensure that the park can accept stormwater from the roadways without degrading the water quality in the park's lakes or impacting the park infrastructure. So now I'm going to take a deep dive through some of the different rooms that make up this party, starting with the ecological core, with the lakes, the marsh, and the wetlands. Now, if everyone is familiar with Edgewood Lake and especially Meadow Lake over here, you know that these areas flood on a regular basis. And one of the things that we tried to do in the master plan is we tried to move a lot of the parking that was at the interior of the park, and we tried to move it to the periphery as much as we possibly could while still maintaining access points for everyone to use the park. But what we wanted to do, especially the parking lot south of Edgewood Lake, and even the Taney baseball fields that are flooded quite frequently, we want to let Mother Nature do what it wants to do here, which is to flood. And so we're proposing a series of boardwalk trails where people can still use the park during times when the park needs to flood. We're also looking at improvements to the lakes, such as floating islands with biochar at the bottom that can help clean and improve the water quality. We're looking at different picnic opportunities, as you can see over here as an example, that could be tied to the boardwalk structure. We're also looking at an overlook hill that would be able to overlook not just the park, but provide new view sheds to Center City as well. We would have an overlook system, and most importantly, in the northern part, flanked by the 2 outstretched arms of Pattison Lagoon, will be what we hope to be Philadelphia's #1 nature playground space. And we're really, really excited about this. This will offer barrier-free, ADA accessible play space using natural play pieces such as log scrambles, log piles, boulders. We've designed these custom treehouse features with slides and berms. And one of the coolest pieces will be what we're calling the mega swing, which will really be Philadelphia's greatest swing set. It'll have at least 18 different swing opportunities for all people. And one thing that I wanted to call out about this playground that I'll touch base on later when we get to the western part of the park is the material that we're looking at here. We are not using port-in-place rubber surfaces, using recycled tires or volatile organic compounds, but we're using a surface called corkine, which is a porous cork surface. And everything here is ADA accessible. So we're trying to be as sustainable as we can with our materials here, looking at balancing the needs of playgrounds with our environmental benefits. Moving over to the wetlands that Catherine talked about in the southwest corner of the park. If you remember when I talked about that, this is the highest, one of the highest points in the park right now, and that is all sorts of fill and debris from past demolition projects in the city. This is where Parks and Rec and the airport have partnered together to design 25 acres of tidal wetland into the park, which will be critical for improving the habitat and really expanding the ecological core of the park. That will be tied in with nature trail connections, perhaps even nearby a treehouse forest. And we aim to include a new park maintenance facility in here as well. Now, the cut from this area, which is over 300,000 cubic yards of cut, will be distributed around the perimeter to help elevate that land and keep it high and dry and usable. And I'll touch base on that in just a little bit more. This is an example of what we imagine the wetlands could look like during the master plan process. We also plan to propose significant improvements to Shedbrook Creek itself right now. The water flow in Shedbrook Creek is minimal at best. It basically is just a long linear pond. But some of the improvements that we plan to do include riparian reforestation, but we also plan to actually expand the width of Shedbrook Creek a little bit and be able to introduce kayaks and canoes here so that people can actually paddle this area for the first time. We also propose a series of nature trails. We know people love walking through here with pedestrian bridges as well. This is a view from that hill looking west towards an area that we're kind of calling the Sedge Meadow, where people can paddle around. Now let's move into the urban edge, that perimeter portion of the park where a lot of the active recreation will be. We start with the gateway. So everyone is very familiar. If you've ever come down the subway and gotten off, most people probably get off and go to the stadiums to the left. But FDR Park is accessible right here. And we want to turn that broad Pattison intersection into the major pedestrian gateway for the park. So with a new entrance plaza with public art, wayfinding, and we'll also have enhanced views into the area down below, which we're calling the Great Lawn. So that will include passive recreation, active recreation. We'll be able to have small events as well as large events. Think of this more like the lawn at Central Park. This is almost exactly 15 acres, which is the same thing, even the Great Lawn at Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Also part of, here's sort of the view of what that would look like as you enter into the park. You would no longer be looking at the backs of tennis courts and other things, but it would really expand that view open, increase the vistas, and bring the lakes that are the central core and identity of the park to the gateway itself. Part of that gateway plaza experience is the existing guardhouse building that we're going to be adaptively reusing into a welcome center. So the guardhouse building that you see right here will become a shared co-working space where community organizations can deliver park programming. The project will activate the 3,600 square foot courtyard space over here as a one-stop shop for park users with restrooms, creating a staffed information center and equipment rental. So you can come here, get information about what's happening in the park. They can help get you park permits, and you may be able to rent tennis rackets, fishing poles, maybe a picnic basket or binoculars to go birding if you would like. And in the back, the stables areas will be transformed into a community meeting space overlooking Pattison Lagoon. So this is what that courtyard space could look like. You can finally get food in the park, drinks, coffee, water, Gatorade, maybe even beer or wine, and be able to eat peacefully over here, which is great. This is what the stables, inside of the stables building would look like, with doors opening up to patios overlooking the Pattison Lagoon. Moving westward to the Swedish Museum and the boathouse, we propose this area as being sort of a formal lawn. We thought that this could be a location where we could have smaller events. We had no idea when doing the master plan that this would be really the home for the future flower show, which will kick off later this weekend. Some of the other moves that we planned here is redesigning this entrance experience with entrance gardens and rain gardens, as well as trying to relocate some of the parking so it's not in the central core of the project. This is sort of a view of what we imagine that boathouse lawn would look like as this formal event space. Then we move over to the western part of the park. In order to create our great lawn, we're proposing to relocate the tennis courts, the softball and baseball fields from the Taney and the softball fields over here into one complex on the western side of the park, and introducing basketball for the very first time, which is something that we heard a lot about in community engagement. We also plan on adding another signature play experience to balance the Pattison playground that we're doing over in the eastern part of the park. And there'll also be numerous multi-purpose fields. Catherine can attest to this, but there's a tremendous desire and need for high quality playing fields throughout the entire city. There simply are none. And the goal here is to use the cut from the 300,000 cubic yards of fill from the airport wetland mitigation, and maybe some of the cut for widening Shedbrook Creek, and make this area basically high and dry and playable, which is not what's happening in the park right now. These fields would have to be functional. They would certainly include stormwater management underneath each of them, so they can hold the stormwater quantity, but also filter that water to improve water quality and allow it to slowly make its way out into Shedbrook Creek, as opposed to everything flooding in all at once. The playing surface that we're intending to use right now is synthetic turf, but this is not synthetic turf of the 1960s, Houston Astrodome on a concrete pad. It's also not synthetic turf from the 1990s full of recycled rubber tires with volatile organic compounds. What we propose to use is organic coconut fiber and cork. Go back to that playground example before that I mentioned the Corkine product here. So it's a much different playing surface here. It's much cooler. And the reason for doing this is we're trying to cut out the irrigation. We won't have to mow, so that reduces your carbon footprint by not mowing. You also don't have any pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers. When we started this master plan, we looked at the water quality of Shedbrook Creek, and after 80 plus years of the golf course draining into Shedbrook Creek with all of their pesticides and herbicides and everything, the water quality was not very good at Shedbrook Creek, to put it politely. It was full of algae blooms, and there was almost no oxygen levels in the creek. And we need to make sure that that doesn't happen again. We need to make sure that these athletic fields can be fit into the environment, again, to maximize the ecological, economic, and social benefit for all the park users. It's sort of a zoomed in view of what that area of the park would look like. Moving over to I-95, George was mentioning earlier the potential for activating areas of elevated underneath I-95, and that's what we plan to do here as well. We can add more basketball courts under here, and certainly we can include more overflow parking underneath I-95. But there's even a small strip of land, and we propose no changes to the skateboard park. There's a small strip of land between I-95 and the end of the park property that we plan to bring the Franklin 5K, which is what we're calling that 5K multi-use trail, and propose a series of rain gardens to help alleviate the stormwater that's coming off of I-95 and causing such erosion problems in that part of the park. This is an example of what that area could look like. It's quite activated. The last part of the park to talk about is another very, very important gateway, which is the southeast corner of the park, where the old bathhouses that were built in the 1920s can be historically or adaptively reused for events, maybe even a restaurant that can help support the Great Lawn over here. They could even have views out to a little window into the Meadow Lake, think Tavern on the Green in Central Park. But most importantly, this is really the gateway for all the different changes that are happening over at the Navy Yard. We worked very closely with the Navy Yard while doing the master plan, and it was very important that they have a say in terms of what they thought the program would be, so they didn't have to replicate some of that programming over here, but that FDR Park would be mutually beneficial with the developments that are happening at the Navy Yard right now. This is an example of what this area would look like, this area that we're calling the porch. Now, in parallel to the development of the master plan, the Fairmount Park Conservancy invested in developing community capacity to store the outcome of the plan. This work consisted of building capacity and connection between the Friends of FDR and the community of park users. They worked to identify and employ neighbors and park users to serve as planning ambassadors who could also connect their on-the-ground knowledge to the Friends group. Their team spent hours with the Friends, diversifying and growing their membership, formalizing governance, and creating public calendars of meetings and programming. The goal was to ensure that the Friends emerged from this process with the bandwidth, skills, and the membership to continue the community connections that the planning process initially forged. A park of this scale with a diversity of programs and usership requires active management to deliver a successful experience for all users. The planning effort considers the ongoing cost of operations, establishing a dedicated staff, and development of new revenue sources within the park boundaries. The first step towards achieving these goals began with the hiring of Philadelphia's first park manager in late 2019. Finally, the physical plan is aligned with a vision for public and private partnership led by the mayor, as Catherine said, that shares the responsibility for driving investment to the site. Using the semi-sesquicentennial, which is now the 250th anniversary of our country in 2026, only a few years away, as a planning horizon, the partnership aims to grow the range of investors in this project beyond Philadelphia taxpayers. Establishing a vision for FDR Park while creating shared stewardship among users, agencies, and decision makers is a true product of this process. It is this renewed sense of possibility that will shift the status quo. Now, the Gateway Phase projects and the airport wetland mitigation are the first projects of the master plan to be implemented. The airport wetland mitigation project over here, the Patterson Playground, and the Welcome Center will start going into construction later this summer, followed by the Gateway Plaza next summer. This is a list of some of the recent progress that the Fairmount Park Conservancy and the City of Philadelphia have been able to achieve since the master plan was first presented in 2019. The #1 community complaint, we had those roads paved, which makes all the difference in the world to get around the park. We even added bike lanes. We have, as I said before, appointed the park's first park director. Additional staff members were hired, and keep in mind there were no dedicated park staff to the park when the master plan started. There are over 100 volunteers have been recruited to help out in the park. Parks and Rec even began renovation of the historic Welcome Center by getting a new tile roof, which was desperately needed, and secured, I have 86 here, but at least $90 million that Catherine mentioned earlier. And as we've mentioned previously, it's hosted the 2021 Philly Flower Show, and the 2022 will kick off, I believe, this weekend. So I like to end on this slide for the presentation, because I think it's really a reminder that this master plan is not simply about us, about what we want right now, but it is about the future generations of all Philadelphians, where access to nature, access to fresh air and water, access to high quality recreation are available to all, and where natural and cultural resources can be shared with all communities that call Philadelphia home. Bringing children to FDR Park is about investing in Philadelphia's future safety, health, and livability. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really wonderful to see a compilation of the vision and all the plans for this amazing asset for Philadelphia. If people have questions, please put them in the chat, and I would be happy to go through them. We do have a few questions, so.
I see them, Allison. I'm fine to go through them.
All right.
Allison, do you want me to stop sharing right now, or is there a particular slide that you want me to go back to? Just let me know.
I think going back to the plan would be really helpful so that people can look at them or look at the areas. Okay, I think maybe we can kind of take these in some chunks, because I see some questions around water in particular. Well, actually, let's start with schedule. So there's a couple questions around schedule. Has the park begun the revisions to the park topography to modify the floodplains, and generally, what are the construction start dates?
You can take that one turn. I can give you construction start dates. You can do the topography question.
Well, yeah, let me try to, I think they're sort of trying to be tied together here. I mentioned initially that the wetlands are, over here, that's going to go in construction this summer. And then you have the Patterson Playground will start construction this summer, and the Welcome Center will go into construction this summer. The fencing around the Welcome Center is already set up and established. The next project will be the Gateway project. At that point, the rest of the development of the park, including the implementation phasing that we had broken down on that one chart, is subject to the funding sources that we're able to basically raise for the rest of the project. Certainly, we're sort of a year behind because of COVID. In terms of the modification of topography in the park will be on a case-by-case basis. I will say that we are managing cut and fill in the park, so we have to balance our floodplain. So certainly taking the highest part of the park with all sorts of rubble and debris that will be moved to areas north of the park. The modifications to the playground are relatively minor. There will be some fill where the bandstand area is, but eventually when we add the parking lots in, there'll be some subtraction as we balance any fill out with bioswales that have to manage the stormwater management. Any other larger topographic changes in the park are going to be subject to the funding sources that the city and the Fairmount Park Conservancy will be able to provide.
And with that, Sue Patterson is wondering specifically if FEMA is required to view your plan, basically from like an environmental impact assessment.
We have to get all of our permits for everything that we do through the project here. So whether we're impacting any wetlands, which go through U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Environmental Permitting, we have to go through all of the PWD conceptual and technical approvals, as well as Arts Commission, Historic Commission. So we have to run the full gamut of everything that we do in this park.
I want to mention too that there's two different groups managing the projects in the park too, which I think is important to note. So the airport is managing the wetlands portion of the project. So they're managing that whole section, which means that they're the ones, engaging the designers, applying for the permits, et cetera. And then for the, the play space, the welcome center, that those projects are being managed by the Fairmount Park Conservancy and their project managers.
Okay, and specifically, because I apologize, I don't think I have Sue's question. So she says her question is about the FEMA requirement to notify FEMA that you're modifying the floodplain.
We will be going through all requirements that are necessary to get this park built. Yes, so we are tracking. We had many meetings with Josh Lippert while doing this master plan about tracking cut and fill within the park.
Okay, thank you. Also with water, are there any plans to redevelop the boat basin now that they're removing the ships? Could that be converted to a marina attached to FDR Park, possibly for some residential development around the boat basin if it's converted to marina? Has that been discussed at all?
Oh, do you mean down at the Navy Yard basin? Is that what the question is asking?
Gabriel?
Yes.
Okay.
Catherine, I don't know what the Navy Yard is doing. That's
it's a really interesting idea. I don't know if that's been considered, Gabriel, but it is an interesting idea.
It's an idea I've had. I know it's obviously Navy Yard is a separate entity, but it's an idea I've had over the years. And I know they are removing the ship. So I just thought I'd put it out there.
Another question around water. Could you, and sorry, this is coming from me, I'm just very curious, for the engineering side of it, to get a little technical, are you designing the landscape to meet the 2100 high-risk climate change scenario for the Schuylkill River?
To answer that, I believe the answer should be yes. I'm not familiar with everything within the plan, so I can't commit to everything within inside it. But certainly we're working to improve the stormwater management of the park. And even with the new wetland project, one thing I didn't mention is that culvert that is currently clogged right now will be improved to help manage the stormwater management so that water can get out of the park much better than it currently is right now.
Okay, but you don't know specifically. I'm asking because the river is supposed to raise anywhere from like 4 to 6 feet. Will the culvert still able to drain?
There are current pumps in the park right now that do pump some excess park water out and have been there for decades and decades. There's one up in the corner over here, and I believe at one point in time there was something, a pump in the bathhouse area that has been not working for decades. That is something that the park will need to consider over the next several decades here as the water levels rise, making sure that water can still drain out of the park effectively. That is correct. That is that big challenge that will face the park right now.
Absolutely.
So that's part of the, actually is part of the infrastructure, utility infrastructure that we're also taking a look at to make sure that this land and these investments are solid investments for the next several generations of park users.
Thank you. So with that, the plan does propose a large amount of lawn and artificial lawn areas. What percentage of the site is lawn versus usable natural areas, so not the waterlands? And how does the site manage the stormwater runoff from those spaces? Will they go to the lakes? Will they be like kept on site, like underneath the lawns themselves?
All right, I'll tackle this. Catherine, you can jump in. Let me see, starting with some of the big pieces of lawn. We have the Great Lawn that is over here, which is about 15 acres. That would just drain into Meadow Lake over here. The boathouse lawn that sort of is existing currently right now, we're just sort of formalizing some of the geometry. In the western part of the park, you have the multi-purpose fields and the baseball fields. Together, I think they occupy 8 to 10% of the park, somewhere in there. And as I mentioned before, how the stormwater would work through here, these are all porous, athletic fields with at least, the intent here is to use that bulk fill, redistribute that across, have room at least for a foot or two of stormwater management underneath that, so it can maintain and hold the stormwater that's falling on it, and then be able to filter that as clean stormwater that would then go into Shedbrook Creek at a point where, not right as the rain is falling, but it can store it for a while, allow some of the park stormwater that's in the lakes to drain out, and then gradually those fields can drain out so that the stormwater capacity can be managed throughout the park and also improve the stormwater quality.
Thank you. Shifting over to community, we have a few questions around community. Who managed the community engagement process?
So it was really a collaboration between WRT and the Fairmont Park Conservancy and Parks and Recreation in collaboration with the Friends of FDR Park.
And were there conversations during the engagement process around public spaces to private management?
Yeah, so nothing is going to be privately managed in the park. So this is a Parks and Rec park, and it'll continue to be a Parks and Rec park. So there's no intention for for the park to be privately managed. We do have partners helping to implement the master plan of the park. So from a project management perspective, as I said, the Conservancy is their mission is to to do some of these great public space projects and parks. So they've graciously agreed to make FDR one of their projects and have been raising funds and also executing some of the project delivery. But there's not there's not going to be private management of spaces in the park, aside from the Swedish Museum, which is managed by the Swedish Museum and hopefully will continue to be managed by them for a long time.
And then I know, Catherine, you already answered this in the chat, but just so that everybody can, if they listen to a recording later, can you just talk about designated space for the Southeast Asian market?
Yeah, the Southeast Asian market is pretty incredible. If anyone hasn't checked it out, please go check it out on any weekend. So it's been happening at the park for over 35 years, and we've been working with the vendors. I will say it's historically been a pretty loosely organized effort, even though it has grown and become massive, both in terms of the vendor participation and customers. So what started as a market with one vendor just selling food out of their truck, their van, 35 years ago is now over 70 vendors. And we have thousands of people descending on the park to come to the Asian market every weekend. So it's definitely been a huge management lift for us to be able to, sort of maintain the visitor experience while also managing this massive market that happens every weekend. But we've been working with the vendors on a number of levels. First and foremost, helping to formalize their organization. So they just recently in the past few years with our support created a vendor association. So they have like a leadership team now who helps to make decisions around the market and helps to really, serve as a liaison to all of the vendors, which has really helped us from a management perspective. And then we engaged the Cambodian Association of Greater Philadelphia. They're a nonprofit and they, who does, incredible work with the Cambodian community. But they've come on to really serve as a fiscal sponsor for the vendors, as well as to help raise grants and funding to support, sort of the long-term sustainability and viability and growth of the market. So we helped them secure some funding from the Knight Foundation to do some initial planning. And then yesterday we announced that the Commerce Department is awarding a $100,000 grant to help us with the vendors, come up with what the permanent space in FDR will be for the park. We really, needed the vendors to organize a little bit better so that, we can work with them to really have them develop a vision for the where and the what in the park. And so then we'll help determine the sort of the how and the how much once we go through this planning process over the next year with the vendors. So it's really exciting. And I think everybody feels really good about it.
That's really great. That's wonderful to hear. Oh, sorry to add some of my own narrative, but it really is a space for everybody to be included. So we have a lot of questions around ecology and environment that I think we can move into. Specifically, there's some questions about the meadows. Will the plans for the west end of the park be reconsidered at all to accommodate the meadows, which we all know unexpectedly became this, nature refuge in the time of COVID? Have there been any conversations about the meadows?
There's been tons of conversations on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, we had a golf course there for 40 years, and we closed the golf course, really right before COVID, maybe months before COVID hit, really because it was just not functioning as a golf course, and we knew that it wasn't going to be a part of the plan to maintain that golf course there. And so we closed the golf course and we opened the former course to people to be able to use it, and it did become a really wonderful refuge for folks throughout the pandemic and beyond. And we love the space. We know that there are a lot of people who feel really passionate about the space. My message in terms of the former golf course is there are aspects of it that will remain natural, and there are aspects of it that will change to become more active recreation. And while we are really understand people's passion around how the space currently exists, we know that part of my job as the leader of this agency is to always consider all of the voices and all of the needs of our system and our city. And the good news is that I believe FDR Park, and specifically the 130 acres of the former golf course, are big enough to accommodate lots of different things. And so the former golf course isn't going to stay in its current state, but it absolutely will have 80% of it will be natural lands, and we're going to convert at least 20% of it, probably around 20% of it, which is about 8% of the total park land, into active recreation for fields and courts, as well as what Charlie said, play spaces and, some infrastructure supports for those fields. talked early on, Charlie mentioned this field crisis that we have in the city. And, thanks to the incredible engagement that we did throughout this plan, which was not just, for near users of the park, but really dipped into, so many other neighborhoods to talk about FDR. We know that, there's just a lot of other voices out there of folks that, and an interest of folks that, want to use the park in different ways. And so we just want to make sure that we're respectful to all of those people who were engaged in the plan, as well as the newer users that have come to love the natural space of the former golf course. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is that there's enough room for everybody and for everything, but that, it is going to change, and we all need to share the space.
And do you, just on that, do you see any further revisions to this master plan?
I think that's, yeah, I think it's possible. I think, this is a plan. This isn't a plan that is, it's gonna evolve over time. As it's implemented, it's not going to, my rent's only paid here for the next 18 months. So, I'm sure, there will be, there will continue to be hopefully great support for this plan, but from financially, but it's going to be a huge lift to continue to raise the funds and support to implement the different aspects of the plan. So I think that, this is, I think it's really important to make sure that we accommodate all of these uses and needs. But I think that, it's also, the plan is going to change over time, so, it's not for me to say what happens, 5-10 years from now. This isn't a, this is a $260 million plan that's going to take decades, to implement. I think it's amazing that FDR has a plan for the first time. And, and I'm really excited about the potential to implement as much as we can before, before this mayor leaves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty evident that getting the motor started and the conversations going was such a huge undertaking, and to get to this point, to have a vision that really embraces everybody's views and all of the ecological and community needs into something that's comprehensive is quite a feat. So
yeah, I mean, the truth is that if I've learned nothing else in the 7 years I've been in this job, you can't make everybody happy. And sometimes a great plan, is the same thing as a great compromise, which is, there's something for everyone, but there's not everything for someone. Right. And that's, that's going to be the truth for FDR as well. But, as Charlie said, this is the most diverse park in the city. We see it, and we want to make sure that it stays diverse. We want to make sure that there is room for, the Asian market, that there's room for the Latino soccer leagues, that there's room for youth football, that there's room for, the dog walkers, the birders. We want to make sure that we continue to accommodate everyone, even those that don't have as much, influence and voice, on social media as others. We just have to make sure that we keep equity in mind, always with everything we do. And that's certainly a directive I had from our mayor.
Absolutely. And so with the increased use, have you looked at long-term needs to accommodate an influx of people? Like how many people are you expecting more? And we have some questions around traffic management and parking, around just accessibility. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, it is, it's a huge concern for us, and has been from the jump. And that's, something that we're doing with all of our plans now for parks and open space in the department, is making sure that we're not just thinking about how we build them, but also how we operate and maintain them. And, it's been it's a huge concern for us, in that our department, as many of you know, is one of the most underfunded parks and rec departments in the country. That's just the reality. It's not it's common knowledge. So we really, when we did the planning from a design perspective, we were also at the same time coming up with a plan for how the park would be managed, operated, maintained, and how revenue would be generated. So we have some, I think, good pro formas and ideas of how we can generate revenue at the space. We know that we can't rely on, just city funding to manage, maintain a space of this scale and of this high quality. It's just not you know, I have been fighting for my budget, for our budget, for this department for the 7 years. I have been woefully unsuccessful, and I'm a pretty good fundraiser, but I can't shake that money loose from the city budget. I'll tell you right now. And you know, so we were cut 20%, a full 1/5 of our budget in the pandemic budget cuts, and that has not been restored. So we have to look to other sources of revenue to support a park like FDR, and things like, you know, events, things like, you know, other creative partnerships are things that we have to consider. And that's what we've looked at. And we'll continue to look at that. Concessions, you know, other ways that we generate revenue for spaces.
Mhm. And there's some specific questions around parking. Let's see, how can I break this up? Can you just talk about traffic management plan and parking spaces? Will there be any sort of collaboration with the stadium district when it's not, you know, those parking lots are not in use?
Yeah, so that's not, you know, really we're trying to accommodate the parking within the park itself. And you'll see, Charlie, I don't know if you have that slide of the before and after for FDR. Well, it's supposed to do the numbers, but I didn't
No,
see
that's
it
in the master plan
presentation.
report, not in the presentation.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a really good slide. Hopefully we can send it to you guys about sort of the before and after, and it demonstrates, you know, how many parking spots now, how many parking spots after. So we are looking to accommodate additional parking in the park, certainly. And we know that that's a real concern for the surrounding South Philadelphia community of Packer Park, you know, that they don't want to, you know, have to deal with increased parking on the streets, you know, and increased traffic around the streets. But we also have, you know, done, you know, traffic studies within the park, and have really thought about how traffic will flow in the park. It will flow differently. It is a nightmare down there now on a Saturday and Sunday. I'll be honest, you know, that, you know, again, the Asian market with 1,000 people coming. And if that's happening at the same time that Taney's having baseball games, I'm sorry, the Dragons are having baseball games. I mean, you have a logjam in that park every single Saturday. In fact, some days we have to close the park to cars at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, because we can't accommodate them. So again, we want to make sure that we're as accessible as possible. So we've taken all of that into consideration with how the new roads will flow in the park. We also we'll be building for the first time a 5K trail through the park, which will be a recreational trail, you know, for bikes and pedestrians, that will only cross roads twice, if it's my correct understanding. So that's a huge, I think will be a huge asset for park users, but also for us as a department, another place to send 5Ks, because, you know, you guys, I'm sure, see everybody wants to have their 5K on the parkway. You know, we do send some over to Memorial Hall because we have a 5K trail there, but really this will be a huge asset for us to be able to host 5Ks in FDR.
And I think just in terms of some of the numbers here, flipping through the master plan, the current park holds about, well, it depends what it should hold and what it can hold. As Catherine mentioned, right now, there are over 1,000 or 1,500 cars on the weekend, but they're parking on the grass. They're parking all over the place. In terms of official parking spots, which are along the park road and some of the parking lots that are there now, it's only about 850 or so, plus or minus a bit. The master plan plans on doubling that, but when we open up the western part of the park, we still have the park road and sort of distributed parking lots throughout to provide access for everybody, as well as that overflow parking underneath I-95 that can hold several hundred cars as well.
Yeah, capturing some of that under 95 is a huge deal for us.
That's great. Yeah, I didn't think about that space underneath there. Well, we have just a couple minutes left. A couple other lingering questions that we have here. And is there a plan to restore, sustain ecological diversity in the park, including removing invasive plants, planting natives, ample space for habitat? And I think with that, if you could loop in any considerations that if you worked with an ecologist, citing program, different programs next to ecological areas, so those ecological areas could be protected from, like, say, noise, like for the birders that are out there, where we know noise can interfere with their mating, their ability to mate.
Sure, I can tackle some of this and Catherine jump in. Yes, the ecology was a driver for everything that we did within the master plan. So, that was really the heart of what we call the ecological core here, is to try to preserve that water quality, quantity, stormwater management, and habitat. We know that there's several endangered species, whether they be plants or even red-bellied turtles, that call FDR Park home. We work with the Fish and Boat Commission and make sure that everything that we do within the park is according to their guidance. We also know, as I mentioned before, that this is an important bird area with 195 different species of birds, many migratory birds traveling thousands of miles that stop off for weeks or months at a time at FDR Park. One of the things I find really so interesting, I'm just going to zero in real fast on Meadow Lake. Way back, one of the things I didn't mention about how the park has changed over time is that this sort of southeast lobe of Meadow Lake used to be a swimming pool, concrete swimming pool with chlorine, et cetera, and these bathhouses were used for that swimming pool. In the 2000s, that swimming pool was taken out because it wasn't functioning. It was cracking and mixing with the other lake water. And so that whole area was renaturalized. And before that, Edgewood Lake was the main area where you would see wildlife and birds, even though there are tons of people actively using the areas all around it. But Meadow Lake has turned into quite a little wildlife sanctuary in terms of what is happening here. So that riparian buffer has sort of been expanded around here, even though Liga Pattison plays their soccer games right over here. There's plenty of use along the lawns over here. And of course, the Phillies fields are still actively used along with the Taney fields over here. So even though there's a tremendous amount of activity that's happening around these areas, there's still little pockets or sanctuaries of wildlife that are really amazing and have diverse wildlife as well. When we looked at the master plan, we looked at trying to, we worked a lot with, Audubon Society, for an example, was one of the stakeholders that we worked with. And I'll never forget, the leaders from the Audubon Society saying, keep it messy. You landscape architects, you want to, keep everything clean and in your spaces here. But, birds love it when the lakes flood. Let it flood. Let it do what it wants to do here. And so that's something that has always stuck with us here. So we want that ecological core to be able to flood, to let those waters expand across the land for that type of habitat. Even when we look at something, if we go down to like lighting design, dark skies principles are really important. We're not looking to add additional lighting in the middle of the park of the ecological core in our most sensitive habitat areas. So those are things that we're trying to do to make sure that the ecology is protected here in the park. I hope I answered the question. I'm not sure if there's anything that I missed out there.
Could you just speak to the plants that you're looking to establish in the park? Is there a focus on native, non-invasive plants?
Yes, obviously. Everything in the park will be native planting, non-invasive. The plant palette that we developed, we did a whole design guidelines process and worked with Fairmount Park Conservancy and Parks and Recs to go through that. A lot of the plants that we have to do for stormwater management certainly have to be approved by PWD. But yes, it's very important here that we maintain native plants, especially for the ecology of this incredible park. And because there are over 195 different species of birds, we're also looking at the ecological value of the plant material we're putting in there. So looking at obviously plants like oak trees that can support hundreds of different types of caterpillars that can help support the food chain for the important birds that are in the park are things that are really critical. The other thing that's really important that we need to start taking a look at are the next over the next 100 years for the life of the park here, is recognizing that we're going to have hotter and wetter futures here and looking for native plant material that can adapt to the changing climate over here. That may involve pin oaks in the northern part of the park, may involve cottonwoods in some of the southern wetland areas, and even some of the sweet gums, and maybe even some of the native cherry trees that some of the birds that currently use the park, or they're really important as food source and habitat for them.
Thank you so much. Well, we unfortunately are over time, and I just want to thank you. There's such a robust and deep narrative to unpack here in just an hour, and we really appreciate the time that you gave today to speak about this park and how you envision it transforming Philadelphia and its surrounding neighborhoods and communities. So thank you for your time. And I don't know, Eli, if you have any other closing comments?
Yeah, we generally do our little Zoom muted applause here. So thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Great to see so many people out today. I just dropped in the link for July's presentation with Gregory Reeves from Mosaic Partners. So grab your free ticket to that. We'll be back in a month there. And if you have thoughts, if you want to write something, if you want to get in touch, dagfellow@gmail.com is the way to get in touch with us. And everybody enjoy your Thursday.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.